On the morning of September 2, 1945, as Japanese officials stood rigidly aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay and watched General Douglas MacArthur accept their nation's formal surrender, they witnessed the physical manifestation of a warning delivered years earlier by a man who had been dead for more than 2 years, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Shot down over the Solomon Islands in April 1943 by American fighters acting on intercepted flight plans, because what surrounded the Missouri that morning was not merely a victorious fleet but the full, undeniable embodiment of American industrial firepower. More than 300 warships packed Tokyo Bay, aircraft carriers stretching to the horizon, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines forming an iron ring around the defeated empire, while above them nearly 900 American aircraft thundered overhead in perfectly ordered formations, a sky-filling reminder that Japan had not simply lost a war but had collided head-on with a level of production, logistics, and sustained power it could never hope to match. And as the surrender documents were signed, those Japanese admirals and generals, many of whom had privately known the truth for years, were left to confront the reality they had chosen to ignore, that America's firepower was never a secret, never hidden, and never misunderstood by those who mattered most. Because Japan's leaders had known exactly what the United States was capable of and still chose to strike. And that truth begins with Yamamoto himself, the Imperial Navy officer who understood America better than almost anyone in Tokyo, a man who had spent years living among Americans, studying their society, their economy, and their psychology, arriving in the United States in 1919 at the age of 35 to study at Harvard University. Already a veteran of the Russo-Japanese War with 2 fingers missing from his left hand, scars earned at Tsushima, yet nothing in his combat experience prepared him for what he encountered in America, where he walked the tree-lined streets of New England, rented rooms in Boston, played poker and bridge with businessmen and naval officers, learned English fluently, and absorbed lessons far more important than tactics or gunnery, because through those card games he recognized a national character defined by calculated risk-taking, competitiveness, and an unwillingness to accept defeat, traits utterly incompatible with the Japanese assumption that Americans were soft, decadent, or unwilling to endure hardship. And more importantly, Yamamoto studied economics, focusing especially on oil, recognizing earlier than most that petroleum was the lifeblood of modern warfare, that ships, aircraft, tanks, and trucks all depended on fuel, and in America he saw oil wealth on a scale Japan could scarcely comprehend, with Texas oil fields pumping more in a month than Japan possessed in its entire strategic reserve, tank farms stretching to the horizon, refineries operating around the clock, while Japan had virtually no domestic oil at all and depended on vulnerable sea lanes thousands of miles long. And beyond oil he saw steel mills in Pennsylvania pouring rivers of molten metal day and night, Pittsburgh alone producing more steel than the entire Japanese empire, and automobile factories in Detroit where Ford and General Motors assembly lines produced more vehicles in weeks than Japan could build in years, an efficiency and scale that fundamentally reshaped Yamamoto's understanding of what war against the United States would mean, because he realized that war would not be decided by courage, spirit, or even early victories, but by which nation could outproduce, outrepair, and outsustain the other over time. And when Yamamoto returned to Japan and rose through the ranks, serving again as naval attaché in Washington from 1926 to 1928, his warnings grew more urgent as he observed American naval exercises, read American newspapers, studied industrial output, and repeatedly told colleagues that Japan could not win a prolonged conflict against a nation with such resources, famously stating that anyone who had seen the factories of Detroit and the oil fields of Texas knew Japan lacked the national power for a naval race with America, and when asked in 1940 what would happen if Japan went to war with the United States, Yamamoto delivered the prophecy that would define the Pacific War, explaining that he could guarantee victory for 6 months to a year, but beyond that he had no expectation of success, because after that period American industry would awaken fully and overwhelm Japan, and when pressed further he stated bluntly that true victory over the United States would require marching into Washington and signing a treaty in the White House. not as bravado but as a warning that anything less than total conquest would mean eventual defeat, a reality Japan's leaders dismissed as excessive caution. And yet when war was chosen despite his objections, Yamamoto loyally devoted himself to giving Japan its best possible chance, designing the attack on Pearl Harbor to cripple the Pacific Fleet and buy time, believing that if Japan could not win a long war it might force a negotiated peace through early shock. And on December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft launched from 6 carriers achieved total tactical surprise, sinking or damaging 18 American ships, destroying nearly 200 aircraft, killing over 2,400 Americans. Yet even as celebrations erupted, Yamamoto recognized the fatal flaws. The American carriers were absent, fuel depots untouched, repair facilities intact, and worst of all, the attack unified American public opinion overnight, transforming isolationist hesitation into total war resolve. And as Japanese forces swept across the Pacific in the following months, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Yamamoto quietly counted down the months, knowing American factories were already shifting into war production, and exactly 6 months later, in June 1942, his prediction came true at Midway, where Japanese carriers were caught at their most vulnerable and destroyed in minutes by American dive bombers, losing 4 fleet carriers, irreplaceable pilots, and the initiative forever, while the Americans, demonstrating precisely the industrial miracle Yamamoto had warned about, returned the battered Yorktown to combat after just 72 hours of repairs, and from that moment onward the war became a grinding demonstration of industrial disparity, as Japan struggled to replace ships and pilots while American shipyards launched new carriers monthly, building 24 Essex-class carriers alone, churning out destroyers every few days, constructing Liberty ships in weeks, producing over 300,000 aircraft compared to Japan's 70,000, and training pilots at a rate Japan could never match due to fuel shortages and industrial constraints, a disparity that manifested brutally in the skies as American Hellcats, Corsairs, and Lightnings overwhelmed increasingly inexperienced Japanese pilots flying obsolete aircraft, culminating in disasters like the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where hundreds of Japanese planes were destroyed for minimal American losses, effectively ending Japanese carrier aviation as a fighting force. And on land the pattern repeated at Guadalcanal, Saipan, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, where Japanese courage met inexhaustible American firepower, naval gunfire delivering more explosives in a day than Japan could muster in months, engineers building airfields in days using machines while Japanese troops labored by hand, soldiers starving while Americans received regular rations and reinforcements, and by 1945 Japan's cities burned under relentless B-29 raids, culminating in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, weapons that embodied the ultimate expression of American scientific and industrial capacity, a project employing over 125,000 people and consuming resources no other nation could have spared. And when Emperor Hirohito finally intervened to end the war, acknowledging that Japan could not endure further devastation, the surrender aboard the Missouri confirmed what Yamamoto had known all along, and in post-war interrogations Japanese commanders admitted the truth. That Pearl Harbor had awakened an enemy they could never hope to exhaust, that American firepower seemed limitless, that ships destroyed were replaced, losses absorbed, momentum sustained, and courage rendered irrelevant against steel, fuel, and production on an industrial scale, and Yamamoto, who never lived to see the end, had been right about everything. His 6 months of victory followed by inevitable defeat unfolding exactly as he predicted, a tragedy not of ignorance but of willful denial. Because Japan's leaders were warned clearly, accurately, and repeatedly, and chose war anyway, leaving millions across the Pacific to pay the price for their refusal to listen to the one man who had seen the future standing inside American factories and oil fields years before the first bomb fell.